It was just an ordinary Tuesday. The kind where nothing special is supposed to happen. I was heading to my weekly bridge game, the same route I'd driven for nearly 20 years. The sun was bright that morning, maybe too bright. I remember adjusting my visor, reaching for my sunglasses on the passenger seat, and then nothing. Just the deafening sound of metal crushing against metal, the airbag exploding in my face, and that terrible moment of realization. In just 3 seconds of distraction, I'd changed someone else's life forever. And my own. I'm Margaret Wilson, and at 73 years old, I had my first serious accident after 5 decades of what I thought was perfect driving. You know, when you've been driving for 50+ years without major incidents, you develop this sense of, well, invincibility isn't the right word. Maybe it's complacency. You think you've seen it all, handled it all. My children used to joke that I had mom reflexes when they were young. But reflexes change. Vision changes. Reaction time changes. And sometimes it takes something dramatic to make us realize that. The young woman in the other car, her name was Caitlin, suffered a broken collarbone and whiplash. I walked away with minor cuts and bruises, but the emotional scars, those run much deeper. I couldn't sleep for weeks afterward, replaying those seconds over and over. What if I'd killed her? What if my grandchildren had been in the car? The what-ifs are the ghosts that haunt you after something like this. When the police officer asked what happened, I automatically started to say, she came out of nowhere. But that wasn't true, was it? She didn't come out of nowhere. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. I was the one who drifted across the center line while reaching for my sunglasses. It's amazing how quickly we try to shift blame, even when we know better. The hardest part wasn't the insurance paperwork or the car repairs. It wasn't even facing Caitlin when I visited her in the hospital to apologize. The hardest part was admitting to myself that maybe, just maybe, I needed to rethink how I approach driving at this stage of my life. Let me tell you something they don't tell you about aging. It sneaks up on you. One day you're 45, feeling invincible, and then suddenly you're 73, squinting at street signs and wondering when they started making the print so small. I'd noticed little changes over the years, needing more light to read, having trouble with night driving, but I'd adapted without really acknowledging what was happening. After the accident, my doctor suggested a comprehensive driving assessment. I was defensive at first. I've been driving since before you were born, I told him. He just smiled and said, and I want you to keep driving safely for years to come. That assessment was eye-opening. My peripheral vision had diminished significantly. My reaction time was about 40% slower than it had been in my 50s. And my ability to process multiple stimuli simultaneously, like watching the road while reaching for something, had decreased more than I realized. This isn't about giving up independence. It's about acknowledging reality. Our bodies change, and pretending they don't puts ourselves and others at risk. That's a hard pill to swallow for someone who's prided herself on self-reliance her whole life. After working with a driving rehabilitation specialist, yes, that's actually a profession, and thank goodness for these angels, I learned that I didn't need to give up driving. I just needed to adapt. And those adaptations were surprisingly simple. First, I created a pre-driving checklist. Sounds silly, right? Like I'm preparing for takeoff in an airplane. But it works. Sunglasses on before starting the car. Phone silenced and put away. GPS programmed before shifting into drive. No exceptions, no matter how short the trip. Second, I changed when I drive. No more night driving. My night vision isn't what it used to be, and those headlight halos were getting worse. No driving during rush hour when possible. And absolutely no driving when I'm tired or have taken medication that might affect alertness. Third, and this was the hardest one for my pride, I accepted that I needed to limit distractions. That means no more adjusting the radio while driving. No reaching for things. No complicated conversations. And certainly no answering the phone, even hands-free. Studies show that cognitive distraction is just as dangerous as visual distraction, especially for seniors. Our brains can only juggle so many tasks at once, and that capacity diminishes with age. You know what's interesting? These changes haven't limited my independence. If anything, they've extended it by making driving less stressful and more enjoyable. I arrive places feeling calm instead of frazzled. And I know I'm doing everything in my power to keep myself and others safe. I've never been what you'd call tech-savvy, my grandchildren. Laugh at how I hold my smartphone at arm's length to read texts. But after the accident, I realized technology could actually help compensate for some of the changes I was experiencing. My son convinced me to trade in my 15-year-old sedan for a newer model with modern safety features. I was resistant. That car and I had history together. But the difference is remarkable. My new car has blind spot monitoring that alerts me when there's a vehicle I might not see. It has a backup camera with guidelines that make parking so much easier. And it has lane departure warnings that would have prevented my accident entirely. Learning to use these features took time. I actually sat in my driveway for an hour with the manual, figuring out each button and setting. But now, I wouldn't drive without them. They're not replacing my skills, they're enhancing them. I also discovered apps specifically designed for senior drivers. There's one that helps plan routes to avoid left turns across traffic, which, by the way, are one of the most dangerous maneuvers for older drivers due to decreased neck mobility and judgment of oncoming traffic speed. Another app reminds me of my pre-driving checklist and can even alert family members if I'm driving at unusual hours. Technology isn't a crutch. It's a tool. And being willing to use new tools is how humans have always adapted to changing circumstances. For many seniors, the dreaded car keys conversation with adult children looms like a storm cloud on the horizon. We fear it because we see it as the beginning of the end of our independence. I was fortunate, or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, that my accident forced the conversation before my children had to bring it up. But here's what I learned. When approached with respect and love, this conversation doesn't have to be about taking away freedom. It can be about preserving it through adaptation. After my accident, my daughter Janet started asking questions. Not accusatory ones, but thoughtful ones. Mom, do you ever feel uncomfortable driving at night? Have you noticed any changes in how you feel behind the wheel? Would it help to have someone go with you to new places the first time? These questions opened a dialogue rather than shutting one down. They acknowledged my autonomy while expressing legitimate concern. And because they came from a place of love rather than judgment, I could answer honestly without feeling defensive. We worked together to create a driving plan that made sense for my lifestyle. Janet takes me to evening events now, which gives us more time together anyway. My son programmed frequent destinations into my GPS, so I don't have to fiddle with it. And I've agreed to a yearly driving assessment with a professional, not because they're forcing me, but because it gives all of us peace of mind. If you're a senior dreading this conversation, try to reframe it. See it as collaborative problem solving rather than the beginning of dependence. And if you're the adult child of a senior driver, approach the topic with questions rather than demands. Trust me, we know our abilities are changing. We just need to feel respected in the process of adapting. Here's something I wish I'd known before my accident. There are wonderful resources specifically designed to help senior drivers stay safe and independent. And most of them are either free or very affordable. The AARP offers a driver safety program specifically designed for older adults. It's not about basics, we've been driving for decades after all, but about adapting to the changes we experience. They cover everything from adjusting mirrors to compensate for blind spots, to understanding how certain medications affect driving ability. Many communities also offer senior transportation alternatives for times when driving isn't the best option. I discovered that my community has a volunteer driver program where retired people with good driving records help other seniors get to medical appointments or run errands. It's a beautiful system. I use it occasionally now, and when I'm feeling particularly good, I volunteer as a driver myself. Local occupational therapists often offer driving evaluations that are much more thorough and constructive than the dreaded DMV test. They don't just assess skills, they provide practical solutions for the specific challenges you're facing. And don't overlook your local area agency on aging. They can connect you with transportation resources you might not know exist. In my case, they helped me find a grocery delivery service that has actually saved me money compared to driving to the store myself. The point is, adapting doesn't mean giving up. It means being smart about using the resources available to maintain independence safely. One unexpected outcome of my accident was a renewed commitment to physical fitness. My physical therapist explained that many of the skills that make us good drivers, quick reaction time, neck and shoulder, mobility, core strength for posture, can be maintained or even improved through targeted exercise, regardless of age. I joined a senior fitness class at the YMCA that focuses specifically on maintaining the physical abilities that support independent living, including driving. We do exercises to improve neck rotation, which helps with checking blind spots. We work on hand-eye coordination, which is crucial for steering. And we do reaction time drills that are actually fun. They feel like games, but they're strengthening neural pathways. The difference has been remarkable. After 6 months, my driving rehabilitation specialist noted significant improvements in my physical capacity for safe driving. And there's been an unexpected bonus. I sleep better, have more energy, and my chronic back pain has decreased. Many of us see exercise as something we should do for vague health reasons. But connecting it directly to maintaining driving independence, that's powerful motivation. And it works. Something they don't talk about enough is the emotional aspect of driving for seniors. Driving isn't just transportation. It's deeply connected to our sense of self, our memories, and our place in society. My car was where I listened to my favorite radio programs. It was how I maintained my volunteer work at the library. It was my connection to friends, to shopping, to spontaneous decisions to go see a movie. The thought of changing my relationship with driving felt like changing my relationship with myself. After the accident, I experienced genuine grief. Not just guilt about potentially hurting someone, but grief for what I perceived as lost freedom and identity. I found myself snapping at my children when they offered help. I felt angry when I had to ask for rides. I was mourning something profound. My doctor recommended I talk to a counselor, which felt silly at first. "I'm not depressed," I told him. "I'm just adjusting." But those few sessions helped me recognize that my feelings were normal and valid. More importantly, they helped me separate the practical aspects of driving from the emotional ones. I realized I wasn't grieving the mechanical act of operating a vehicle. I was grieving what that vehicle represented. And once I could name that, I could find other ways to meet those emotional needs. Independence can take many forms. Connection can happen in many ways. My identity is so much more than how I get from point A to point B. If you're struggling with changes to your driving habits, don't discount the emotional component. Acknowledge it, honor it, and then look for creative ways to preserve what driving gave you, even if the driving itself needs to change. Before my accident, I avoided thinking about a future where I might not drive. It seemed too far away, too depressing to contemplate. But one of the most liberating realizations I've had is that planning for changing abilities isn't giving in to limitation. It's actually expanding your options. Now I have a transportation portfolio, instead of just relying on my personal driving. I've researched which ride-sharing services operate in my area and have the apps installed on my phone. I've mapped out which of my regular destinations are accessible by the community shuttle. I've identified which friends and family members might be available for certain types of trips, and I keep a list of backup options. Having this plan doesn't mean I use it all the time. I still drive myself most places, following my new safety protocols. But knowing the alternatives exist, that I've researched them and understand how they work, removes the fear of what if. What if I don't feel well enough to drive one day? What if there's bad weather? What if my car needs repairs? I have answers to these questions now, which actually makes me more confident in my daily driving. This kind of planning is something we should all do, regardless of age. Life throws unexpected challenges at everyone. Having contingency plans isn't admitting defeat. It's being smart and strategic about maintaining independence through whatever comes our way. About 6 months after my accident, I was having coffee with my friend Doris. She mentioned that her husband Richard was becoming a nervous driver, but refused to discuss it. "He nearly hit a cyclist last week," she confided. "But whenever I bring it up, he shuts down completely." I recognized the fear in her voice, the same fear my children had probably felt before my accident. And I recognized the defensiveness she described in Richard, the same resistance I'd felt to acknowledging my changing abilities. That conversation led to something unexpected. I invited Richard for coffee, just the two of us, and shared my story. Not in a preachy way, but honestly, including my fears, my pride, and ultimately, the relief I felt in adapting rather than denying. I showed him my pre-driving checklist, I demonstrated the safety features on my new car. I shared resources without pressure. 2 weeks later, Doris called in tears. Richard had voluntarily signed up for a driving refresher course and made an appointment with an occupational therapist specializing in driving assessment. "He listened to you," she said. When I said the same things, he couldn't hear it. That's when I realized my experience, painful as it was, could be valuable to others. Not because I'm an expert, but precisely because I'm not. I'm just another senior who had to face reality the hard way. Since then, I've spoken at our senior center about my experience. I've had coffee with countless friends who are navigating the same challenges. I've even started a small support group where we can talk openly about the practical and emotional aspects of changing driving habits as we age. Turning my near tragedy into something helpful for others has been healing. It's given meaning to an experience I wished had never happened. And it's connected me with a community of people who understand exactly what I'm going through. If you had told me immediately after my accident that my life would eventually be richer because of it, I would have thought you were crazy or cruel. How could nearly hurting someone else, confronting my limitations and changing long-established habits possibly make life better? But here I am, 3 years later, and I can honestly say that my life has expanded, not contracted. Yes, I drive differently. Yes, there are certain conditions under which I don't drive at all anymore. But those adaptations have created space for new experiences. Because I don't drive at night, I've started hosting more gatherings at my home. My house has become a hub for friends and family in a way it wasn't before. Because I'm more selective about when and where I drive, I've become more intentional about my activities. No more aimless errands just to fill time. Now each outing has purpose and meaning. I've discovered the joy of ride-sharing with friends, not just for practical reasons, but for the companionship. Those drives to our volunteer work or book club have become treasured times for conversation. I've connected with younger neighbors who are happy to pick up something for me when they're making a trip to the store I'd rather avoid driving to. Most surprisingly, I've found a new sense of peace. There's something liberating about acknowledging limitations and working with them, rather than fighting against them. The energy I used to spend worrying about my driving now goes toward enjoying the places I go and the people I see when I get there. Life changes. That's its nature. But change doesn't have to mean loss. Sometimes it just means finding a new path to the same destinations that matter most. That ordinary Tuesday, the day of my accident, feels like a lifetime ago now. In many ways it was. That was the day that divided my life into before and after. The day that forced me to confront realities I'd been avoiding and find new ways forward. I still think about Caitlin often. We've stayed in touch, remarkably. What started as my profound apology has evolved into an unlikely friendship. She's forgiven me. The harder journey has been forgiving myself. But here's what I've learned through all of this. Adapting isn't giving up. It's the opposite. It's finding new ways to hold on to what matters most. Independence, connection, purpose, joy. These things don't disappear when we change how we drive. They just take different roads to reach us. If you're a senior driver, I hope you won't need an accident to prompt these reflections. Start the conversation with yourself now. Be honest about what's changing. Be creative about how to adapt. Be open with loved ones about what you're experiencing. And if you're the loved one of a senior driver, approach the topic with respect and collaboration rather than judgment or fear. Remember that driving represents so much more than transportation. Honor that emotional reality while working together on practical solutions. The accident changed everything for me, but not in the ways I feared. It didn't end my independence. It transformed it into something more mindful, more intentional, and ultimately more satisfying. My hope in sharing this story is that others might find their way to that same transformation, just perhaps with a gentler path than the one I took. After all, the journey matters, but arriving safely, that matters even more.